Did you know that an Australian Labradoodle is not the same thing as an Aussie Doodle? Many people call them Aussie Doodles, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine because they're completely different. An Aussie Doodle is an Australian Shepherd and a Poodle that are bred together. That's a first generation mixing, and you're going to get very strong representations of both lines in that breed. Where the Australian Labradoodles were created in the 1980s by scientists and professionals that wanted to have therapy dogs that were great for hypoallergenic kids. So they mixed together 6 or 7 different breeds. There was a process of trial and error, but all these breeds were put together to form the Australian Labradoodle. So it's an English Cocker Spaniel, an American Cocker Spaniel, an Irish Water Dog, a curly-coated Retriever, a Poodle, a Lab, and there was one other originally that I can't remember the name of what was in there. So all those were bred together to create the Australian Labradoodle. So this took quite a lot of time to create this breed very intentionally. It wasn't just, hey, let's throw these 2 dogs together and get something. Then my Australian Labradoodles are all at least 5 generations deep. The puppies are 5 to 6, even 7 generations deep, purebred Australian Labradoodle, which is huge. And all of my lines go back to the original breed. So the Australian Labradoodle is completely different than regular Labradoodles, which actually did come out of our breed. That's what Labradoodles were created, just with a Lab and a Poodle. So the original mix was the Australian Labradoodles. And again, a Labradoodle is completely different than an Australian Labradoodle. That's just a Lab and a Poodle. So you're not going to get the depth of the genetic lines, the multi-generational aspect, or all the different breeds. And what happens is there are other regulatory boards that allow Australian Labradoodle breeders to have infusions, which would be a dog that's not a purebred Australian Labradoodle in the line. Which I don't. I belong to the regulatory group ALCA, Australian Labradoodle Club of America, which has the highest standards for breeding. And they haven't allowed infusions since the very early 2000s. I can't remember the exact year. But some of those that do, they're charging the same amounts that do allow infusions, and they've got a Poodle a couple generations back in the line, or a Cockapoo. And that's just not the same thing whatsoever. And I can tell by looking at dogs immediately by their face shape, by their coat, their eyes, if they're a purebred, multi-generational Australian Labradoodle or not. And the difference will be in coat, in behavior, in temperament, health, but also conformation. I can completely tell by looking at them if they're a purebred Australian Labradoodle or not. So that's a little bit of the history of Australian Labradoodles.